The story begins with the street being dark from explosions and thick, dark columns of smoke. Giant monsters walked around the city. The main character walked along one of the empty streets and glanced at one of the monsters. He looked at the monster and thought about how it felt like he was this huge dragon. The boy turned his back to him as if not afraid. He stood on the edge of a cliff. Planes circled over high-rise buildings. Explosions continued to sound on the streets of the city. The monsters attacked people, attacking them and killing them very brutally. It was a terrible sight, and the screams of people could be heard at every step. Have you ever seen a strange dream in which a huge beast obscures the sun, darkens the sky, and seems so close and dear? The main character looked at one of the monsters straight in the eyes and thought that they were like a single whole. He saw himself in this monster and felt as if he was the embodiment of it. The boy's gaze was fixed on the monster. A powerful explosion occurred again, and the stone mountain exploded. People couldn't fight monsters. Women and children ran away with horror in their eyes, not knowing where to hide or how to resist them. The world honors and respects the main character as if he were God himself. The boy sat on the roof of the house and watched what was happening. One of the monsters was behind the main character. He looked forward without fear of anyone around. Meanwhile, the evening news is on the air. On June 2, 2024, the Ning City Zoo was attacked by a snake more than 100 meters long. Experts have not yet determined the type. Some residents were able to film the appearance of the giant beast, creating quite a stir on social networks. Recently, internationally wanted criminals have been roaming around the city. The main character looked at the guy lying in a pool of blood and wondered if this was his body. The little dragon looked in his direction with its eyes. The boy couldn't understand what was happening. He lay in a pool of blood, and the dragon was next to him. Did he really turn into this small marine iguana that looked around with its big round eyes? The main character's name was Chen Chu. He is a second-year student at Ning University. He rents housing with his own money because living in a dorm is the worst thing. He also likes cold-blooded animals because they are very beautiful. A new batch of exotic pets has arrived at the pet store. His view was immediately drawn to the marine iguana. He began to look at her, and he liked her very much. The animal immediately cast its predatory glance at him and licked its lips. Usually they are very affectionate, but at that moment something went wrong and the iguana rushed at him. The animal attacked the boy's hand and began to bite it with all his might, looking straight into his eyes. The main character was holding a phone in his hands, and it was the only weapon with which he could defend himself at that moment. The boy swung the phone and hit the iguana right on the forehead with all his might with the edge of the phone. The iguana flew far back, and the phone also flew into the air, turning over and falling to the floor. After this struggle with the animal, the boy began to open his eyes, finally waking up. Opening his eyes, he saw in front of him an iguana looking at him with its big round eyes. She looked at him intently and raised her hand at the same time as the main character. Does he really control the body of this lizard? It turns out that she is like a puppet. This is something like a golden finger. And does he really begin his journey as a hero at this moment? The boy couldn't figure out what to do with it. Launch the broadcast showing how smart his lizard is or sell it on the market. He's probably not destined to be a hero. When other people receive cheats, they become powerful and gain new powers. Well, or at least the system appears. And here he is stuck with a little lizard. It was evening outside. The lights in people's windows began to come on. The main character looked out his window and thought that he was very hungry. I haven't put a single crumb in my mouth all day today. What does a marine iguana even eat? He took the little animal in his hand and said that, in theory, ordinary meat should suit her. Chen Chu took the knife into his hands and began to cook a delicious dish for himself and his pet. When the iguana saw the dish on the plate in front of her, she immediately began to drool. The main character thought so while looking at this lizard. She happily devoured what he had just prepared. A system suddenly appeared in front of him and reported that after eating, his pet received 5 evolution points, and his physical strength increased by 0.5. The boy asked what it was. The system gave out its full characteristics: external or beginner, key perception, fist fighting skills, cloud jump, springy legs. The main character's pet is an iguana. There are still 0 evolutions. Was this all really a cheat? Chen Chu began to reread his skills, being very surprised. The man told the boy that without understanding the basics, practice would be useless. He won't learn anything like that. The root of his strength lies in his legs. He must control it, feel the tension in his hips and stomach. The man taught the boy to take the correct stance. But the child answered his father that he was very tired. I asked my dad to take a short break, but the father answered your son that only cowards come off halfway. The child clenched his fist and answered his dad that he did not want to be a coward and continued training. A father stood in the middle of a field and asked his son to run faster on the treadmill. He asked him to push himself and not give up. But the boy tripped over a stone that lay right in front of him on the way. He turned over and fell very hard on the asphalt because of this pebble that blocked his path. The boy fell on his back and was completely sweating, breathing heavily, trying to catch his breath. His father asked him to get up. No one will give him a helping hand in his adult life. When they entered the room, the father handed the boy a wooden box containing all his savings. He told his son that he had to go on a long trip. He will walk the remaining part of the path on his own. The father taught his son not to neglect martial arts training. The world is not at all as kind and good as it seems to him. The child asked his father when they would meet again. The father replied that when he becomes a great master, although most likely by that time he will no longer be there. When the father finished this phrase, he immediately went to the door, leaving the boy alone. The boy stood in the middle of the room with this wooden chest and with tears in his eyes watched his father leave. And then the door closed once and for all. The boy never saw his father again. 10 years passed before he realized everything. Now, as an adult, he looked at a photograph where he was sitting on a bench and his father was behind him holding his shoulder. While the boy was looking at this photo, the iguana had already eaten everything and was sighing heavily. The main character, looking at his lizard, thought that it eats very quickly. While he was looking at the portrait, his ears were struck by some kind of crackling noise and he glanced at his pet. The boy decided that it seemed to him, or perhaps he really noticed, that the iguana was growing. Chenchu began to unravel the monitor screen and noticed that 15 points had been added after eating. The main character was very surprised by this and glanced towards the mirror. He lifted his shirt and noticed that his body had not been so toned before. The points the iguana receives also affect him. If he scores more points, he will be able to evolve. The boy began to draw conclusions and thought about his lizard. Perhaps he will even grow as huge as in his dream. Chenchu began to remember that dream. He was confident that he would then become a great martial artist. Meanwhile, at the market, Chenchu bought 10 pieces of boneless beef. 12 servings of pork are also boneless. The seller asked whether he would pay in cash or by card. The boy replied that he paid for the goods with a card. But he paused and wondered if this would be enough. When he finally got his money's worth, he went outside and put all his groceries in the trunk. The main character closed the trunk and began to head towards the house as quickly as possible to feed his pet again. The day was very bright and the sky was blue. The high-rise buildings rose very high like giant boulders. Chenchu had already prepared several dishes and placed these plates full of food right in front of his pet. This time, he prepared not just one dish, but a whole table. The iguana was already swallowing saliva. The main character asked the pet to eat more, and then he could soon become a martial arts master. The boy was watching the iguana and noticed that pork was not as good as beef. Day after day, he watched his pet and fed him the most delicious and rich dishes. When Chenchu once again fed his little animal, he decided that next time he would take more beef. Meanwhile, the iguana was resting after such a delicious lunch, lying in front of the window. The main character was in the training room. He stood in front of a hanging huge bag with which he was boxing. The boy was serious and glanced at this giant, very strong pair. He decided to strike first and noticed that his strike was very powerful and strong. The system showed that after his intense training, his experience increased by +5. Chenchu was glad that he had indeed become stronger and could feel his muscles tightening. And so several days passed. The main character again stood in front of the punching bag, training hard. He had a feeling as if his strength was growing after training, and it amazed him. The boy accelerated with more and more blows and hit this bag harder and harder. But this time, the punching bag shattered halfway from his powerful blow. The system produced much better results than initially. His physique and spirit were already much higher. From the point of view of traditional martial arts, he would have already reached the top of the kingdom with such indicators. Looking at the table, the boy smiled and decided to continue moving towards his goal. He remembered his father telling him that the fields of martial arts were divided into mind, darkness, and transformation. The pinnacle of the Ming realm would make him a first-class fighter, capable of taking out 10 on his own. The Dark Kingdom will make him a fighter capable of fighting hundreds at once. This usually happens in legendary families, and transformation with 1,000. There are masters whose names are immortalized in history. The father told this to his son with great enthusiasm. As for the realm of transformation, it represents an indestructible body. This is how it is described in some ancient texts. The son asked his father what kingdom he was in then. Dad, lowering his gaze to the floor, answered his son that for now it was only dark, but he still has a long way to go. The son smiled and clenched his fists and told his father that he was very cool. He asked if his father was also from those legendary families. Dad thought about his question, and he answered his son that not at all. The main character, after another training session, entered the room and, glancing at the iguana, noticed that he was growing by leaps and bounds. One more dish and evolution will take place. He hopes that the pet will not disappoint him. And now the iguana was already devouring another delicious dish prepared by its owner. Evolution points grew faster and faster. The main character was ready for change and couldn't wait for it. When the evolution points reached 200, the marine iguana was ready to evolve. The boy began to watch his pet and noticed that his body glowed with a bright golden light. The iguana began to turn over in the air, flying higher and higher. Chenchu grabbed his other hand with his hand. He writhed, turning over like this iguana, rolling from side to side on the floor. His pet finally evolved and fell exhausted to the floor. Then he began to rise again and spin in the air, turning everything around and hitting the walls. The main character finally fell to the floor with his arms outstretched and exclaimed that he didn't think it would hurt so much. The boy heard some noise and became wary. He decided to get to his feet and looked into the room. In front of him was an iguana much larger and more powerful than it was before. The main character decided to see how strong he had now become and approached his pet. The iguana, with one deft movement of its tail, hit the punching bag and it scattered into halves in different directions. Chenchu smiled very contentedly and laughed and exclaimed that the iguana now has unusual power. The system has already given out the evolution of the iguana. The main character's physique and spirit also increased. The boy told the iguana that he didn't think that after his evolution, his physique and attributes would double. He didn't really feel anything, perhaps because he was still too weak. But as it evolves, its attributes also grow. This means his strength will also increase in the future. And in the future, he will surpass everyone and is even a little scary. The main character went into his room again and looked at his beloved pet. The boy noticed, crossing his arms over his chest, that the iguana was too huge. Now he can't even get into his room. Looks like it's time to return her to her true habitat. He got behind the wheel of the car and rushed along the highway. They drove with the pet for a very long time, and finally, Chenchu said that they were already there. The main character began to open the doors of his car and the iguana came out of it. The boy closed his eyes, releasing the pet into the wild, and began to watch what he would do. The iguana ran forward towards the water. She went as deep into the water as possible, after which she began to dive into the ocean, plunging into her favorite and natural environment. The pet's sixth sense was activated. Chenchu seemed to merge with him. Now he feels everything that happens within a radius of 10 meters from him. He could see and feel different fish, as if he were in the water with his pet. He even tried to open his eyes and saw a fish with 5 eyes. The boy decided that this was an excellent target for eating. The iguana rushed toward its prey and began to hunt it, approaching the giant fish. The pet was already very close and hovered a little, preparing to attack its opponent. The iguana opened its powerful, huge mouth and began to approach the fish. She grabbed the fish by the side and began to tear it from side to side with her teeth. After being eaten, the marine iguana gained 10 evolution points, and his physique also became more powerful. After evolution, he receives 1 point for each meal, but the mutated fish gives as many as 10. With the appearance of these kinds of creatures in the ocean, it seems that the world is far from a peaceful life. The pet continued to hunt other huge fish that were up to its size. He caught another healthy fish and tore it into small pieces after feasting on it. To human eyes, the ocean at night is cold and pitch black, but through the eyes of an iguana, the underwater world is so bright and colorful. Being an amphibian, the marine iguana can stay in fresh water for a long time. Well, due to the lack of gills, you have to rely on the lungs. However, you need to climb to the surface every time. This is what they did together with their pet. They began to move through the ocean beauty and came out into one of the underwater caves. The main character noticed that this was a very good place to hide, and he decided to leave the iguana here, after which the boy began to get into his car since it was time to go home. He raced in his car along the highway approaching his house. Suddenly, the boy glanced at a house that stood very far from residential buildings. Chenchu thought about how someone could still live in such a strange, creepy place. The window in this house was boarded up and someone was calling very loudly for help. The main character heard this call for help and slowed down a little in front of this house. The boy decided that it seemed time to put his powers into practice and turned his gaze forward. 2 guys stood outside the doors and one of them asked the second if the car had left. The second one answered the guy that she really had left, and he slapped him on the shoulder and exclaimed that it was just wonderful. Meanwhile, the third guy asked the girl who was lying near the wall to shut up. The bald head walked up to him and kicked him. He asked if he would keep an eye on her normally, as if he couldn't put the gag back in her mouth. The guy answered the boss that it was very dark here and he didn't notice, after which the girl was already lying with a gag in her mouth. She was very scared and tears flowed from her eyes. Baldhead walked up to her and asked her to shut up and be a good girl, or he'll leave her with his boys all night. Meanwhile, the main character was already approaching the building. He closed his eyes and began to listen carefully. He wanted to feel what was happening inside. Chen Chu was already approaching the car, which stood opposite the door to the room. The villains were sitting at the table and pouring drinks into glasses. Near one of them lay a huge sharp knife. The gagged girl continued to sit helpless and tied near the wall. Another of the guys stood near the wall with a phone and sometimes glanced in the direction of the girl. The main character decided that it could be kidnapping or human trafficking. Two of them have knives. It's better to deal with them as soon as possible. He did not want to endanger the hostage and began to approach the door as quickly as possible. The boy broke down this door with one movement of his foot and flew into the room heading towards his opponents. The guys immediately got up from their seats and the main character kicked one of them in the stomach. The guy flew far back, falling back against the wall and streams of blood flying out of his mouth. Meanwhile, his boss was already approaching him from behind with a knife in his hands and swinging at him. The main character was much stronger and hit him in the chest with all his strength and he flew back. Streams of blood also began to flow from his mouth. But before he could fall, his comrade managed to catch him. He asked his boss to rest and decided to use his enemy abilities. He said that he was Yu Wen's student and asked the boy to introduce himself. The main character replied that he was Luo Tuan's student, and his name is Chen Chu. Before us is the countryside. The events took place in the same house in which the hostage was located. The protagonist's opponent decided to use the first blow from Tulu's fist. Before he could raise his hand up and clench his fist, Chen Chu made a move for him. He made a move first with his hand, then with his foot, so that the guy immediately flew to the side. The second strike of two horses in the Tang era, the main character managed to dodge this blow. He thought to himself that this was not bad at all. The guy was no slouch either. He watched his opponent, thinking that he had much more agility and strength. The guys continued to fight each other. The main character dodged the blow again. His opponent tried to attack, but he couldn't hit the boy. 8-limb strike iron mountain helmet. He swung his fist and released a powerful punch. The guy flew high into the air and rode on his back to the highest wall. Getting to his feet, he told the main character that he didn't expect that when he came down from the mountain he would meet Luo Tuan's student. The Iron Mountain helmet has 8 limbs and is very impressive. Chen Chu responded by telling this guy that it was a great shame and smiled sarcastically. The enemy, wiping the blood from his lips, asked what he had just said. The boy explained that he did not think that the thug would have a fist technique. It is truly a shame that Yu Wen's disciple took the winding path of becoming a bandit. The guy listened carefully to his opponent, trying to get to his feet. He answered the main character that this is arrogance because he is the same student. And he realized that in this world, either he drowns or he will be drowned. He clenched his fist again and approached the boy with a blow. When he flew up to his head, he put his 2 fingers in front of the main character's eyes. But Chen Chu threw his opponent far back with a deft kick. He turned over and this time hit his face directly into the asphalt. He rolled his body over the rocks. The battle between martial arts students is dangerous. He had the feeling that his strength and spirit were superior to him, but he doesn't know how to control himself. No matter how scoundrels they are, you can't treat people like that. The boy decided to deal with this later. Meanwhile, the girl with a gag in her mouth tried to say something but could not. The main character approached her and began to untie the ropes that fell to the floor. The girl threw herself into the boy's arms and he began to calm her down. Chen Chu said that everything is fine now. The girl began to thank him. The main character asked her to wipe away her tears quickly and she could call the police as soon as he left. If the police asked about him, he asked to say that she did not see his face. The boy handed the girl his phone number, and she agreed, looking into his eyes. And then 10 minutes passed. Several police squads had already arrived at the crime scene. Guys with machine guns in their hands and shields began to enter the room. They asked the others not to move and to raise their hands up. But when they went inside, they were very surprised. The bandits were lying face down all over the perimeter. The girl stood on her feet, shielding herself from the light. Police officer Guanqing told the chief that she had brought the information he requested. The girl went into the deputy's office. She explained that they were able to find footprints on the broken door. The poor guy was kicked from the front and the door flew off 3 meters. The force of the blow was simply colossal. 2 of the kidnappers died immediately, and the third fell into a coma after a concussion. According to Lin Ru, the man was wearing a mask and she could not see him. The deputy chief asked how this was possible. The small force that the boxing king squeezed out of himself was even less. This is simply unheard of. And how does an ordinary person have such strength? Police officer Guan Qing replied that the force was truly inhuman, but the weirdness doesn't end there. The police looked out the window at the same time and noticed that a storm was approaching. It was already night outside and the sky was very dark and ominous. The main character was in his car and watched the guys who were standing on the ocean shore. One of the guys told his boss that he had just received money and had already spent it on a woman, and wasn't that a waste? They had to work for so long, but they earned a little more than 2 million. The man asked if he even knew who she was. Money with her and for them will no longer be a hindrance. The guys were very happy and asked if he was telling the truth. Then the man asked the bespectacled man if he had sorted out the company. The guy replied that he had already agreed on the delivery of goods, and they rented a luxury office building for accommodation as he requested. He also asked to find the most beautiful secretaries and receptionists for them. They definitely won't be disappointed. The man said that thanks to his underwater breathing, he was alive. Once they find the site of the sunken ship, they will pull all the treasures ashore and they will then have all the money in the world. The man asked his guys to follow him. But suddenly some kind of explosion occurred nearby. He glanced to the side and asked who was there. The main character stood behind a tree and, showing himself to the guys, replied that, of course, he had seen a lot of scoundrels, but he was just something. The man grabbed the knife and laughed and called the boy brave. As he approached his opponent, he said that such people do not live long. His knife sparkled in the darkness with its cold metal. The man was unable to strike the main character as he dodged and was already near him. With a powerful blow, the main character defeated his opponent and he hit his back against a tree. One of the guys exclaimed that this was simply incredible. The boss became stronger and faster after this superpower of his. The guys decided that they needed to run away, but the main character was over their heads. Chen Chu turned to the boss of these scoundrels and asked him to look him in the eye. He decided to test his mind control powers. The boy asked what his name was and what he was up to here. The enemy replied that his name was Zhang Chanshu and he was a smuggler. A month ago, he learned to breathe underwater. The main character realized that it was working and he was under his control. Zhang Changshu began to explain to the boy that he raids sunken ships in the ocean and exchanges the loot for money. After he told everything to the main character, control was dispelled. The enemy fell to the ground and asked what was wrong with his hand. Chen Chu replied that he broke it himself. The boy thought that mind control had affected his judgment. He asked the guy to rest and return to the ship, and he promised to come soon. Chen Chu thought to himself that in order to raise his lizard, he needed a lot of food. Changshu has a ship and connections. Perhaps he will get something useful for himself. He just has great ability. Of course, when he controls that guy, there is some resistance. But these guys are able to act even more effectively on weak-willed and stupid people. His comrade appeared behind Changshu and asked who it was. The guy replied that it was his boss and asked him to be more polite with him. He gave the command to prepare a contract for transfer. This ship now belongs to his boss. Literally a few minutes passed, and an agreement on the transfer of the vessel was already on the table. Chen Chu asked the bespectacled man to wait for him at the office tomorrow, and he advised Zhang to go to the hospital because he was injured. And then the next day came. The main character, looking at his pet, decided that the ocean was a great place for endless supplies of food. The boy went to the gym again and started training. He thought about how he couldn't rely on just a clone to become stronger. You need to train yourself. After 2 beats, he feels his control has improved. Meanwhile, in the cave, the absorbed energy was assimilated. His pet's evolution points +6. It was already a bright day outside. Chen Chu decided that the transfer process was completed, and he did not go outside for the whole day. Gained as many as 90 evolution points and toned up his body. It turns out he's not the only one with superpowers. He needs to become stronger, especially when he knows what awaits in the ocean. One of the men opened the hatch and said that recently there hasn't been much. Maybe there's a whole school of fish below, or maybe sharks. Sharks move in a group, even killer whales avoid them. And meanwhile, in the depths of the ocean there were indeed many sharks that surrounded the killer whale. The sharks were merciless and cruel. Meanwhile, the iguana was already approaching them. She swam very quickly and headed towards one of the powerful fanged sharks. The iguana fell into the teeth of this terrible shark, but she was very strong and resourceful. The iguana jumped out of the shark's mouth and grabbed its muzzle with its teeth. The shark had very tender meat. Is she really being given a choice now? The boy's clone was ready to evolve, and the system asked if he was ready. The main character answered the system that he was ready. The iguana was already on the shore and flashed with bright pink lightning. At the same time, Chenchu was already sitting on all fours in the gym. Bright lightning also emanated from his body. The system reported that the marine iguana became a ferocious beast. 2 evolutions. Chenchu fell back to the floor and exclaimed that he had broken through. His physique is superior to that of a human, but it didn't double even after evolution, and that makes sense. He thinks this is due to the fact that his performance was low last time. The main character noticed the ability to be related to water. He asked what this ability was. The iguana has become even larger than it was before. The strength has become higher, and the claws are like steel. It can swim at speeds of up to 70 kilometers per hour, which is faster than a ship, and less drag while swimming. It must be a matter of ability. Chenchu called the guys and asked if anyone had found out about the treasure. The boss was told that no, and that they would find them themselves. The guy asked how everything was going there. He was told that they had found several locations with sunken ships. Chenchu thought that the shallow water routes used by Country Z and the main commercial routes of countries N and R were mainly explored. But there are still plenty of ships in the deep waters, southeast 25 kilometers from the coast, and this is a yellow sea. Now, after evolution, he can breathe longer underwater and his senses have improved. He senses everything at a distance of up to 20 kilometers. The boy decided that as soon as he finished with his business, he could move forward. Isn't the point of raising a clone to enjoy life? It's already 11 o'clock and it's time to eat. On one of the streets, a girl fell asleep sitting near a high pole. There was an empty bottle lying next to her. The main character was on one of the streets of the city. It was already evening and many people were walking around the city. After dinner, Chenchu decided that it was very tasty, but 3,000 for dinner is already robbery. He only has 20,000 in his pocket, but he will soon lead John's company, and he will finally understand what it's like to be rich. The main character glanced at the girl who was lying near the pillar and several guys who were near her. One of the guys asked Chenchu why he was looking at him. The boy threw his X-ray look at him. As he gains strength, his passion for martial arts awakens. As long as there is no real danger, he should not interfere. One of the guys with a sharp knife in his hands asked what he said there. Cold metal glittered in the darkness, intimidating the others. The guy asked the main character to leave and he would pretend that he didn't see him. But Chenchu approached his opponents without fear. He was completely enveloped in bright red and yellow flames and clenched his fists. The boy continued to glow with a bright flame and brought horror to everyone else. One of the guys exclaimed that he felt as if some wild animal was looking at him. Then the second guy with a knife in his hands asked him to better leave here. The girl laughed and asked if they had shit their pants. When the main character looked at this girl, he decided that she had clearly gone crazy. One of the guys said that you don't meet such a lady every day. But the guy with the knife replied that he wouldn't leave it like that. There is nothing to be afraid of him since he is an ordinary simpleton. Too self-confident and goofy. The guys with knives in their hands began to run up to their opponent in order to attack him. But before they had time to get closer, the main character put his fist forward and lit up with a bright fiery light. The fiery funnel lifted these 2 scoundrels as high as possible into the sky, and they screamed in horror. Chenchu only used 10% of his strength. Otherwise, the blow would have turned these people into mush. He decided to let them go this time, but not next time. The guys began to run away, calling him a demon and saying that Satan himself had possessed him. The girl watched what was happening and, clapping her hands, exclaimed that he had incredible strength. When the main character scanned her with his X-ray gaze, he realized that she was under substances. Chenchu called the police and said that he was near a woman near the bar. She seemed very drunk. He explained to the police that she looked very strange. The girl asked why he was calling the cops and if he wanted to have fun. A few minutes passed and several police cars had already arrived. Chenchu told the policeman that he was the one who called. He went out after dinner, and there was this girl under some kind of substance. The boy decided that now there was one less thing to do, and it was time to take control of the iguana and find the ship. The bespectacled man was right, and he is definitely here. With his 6th sense, he senses only what is within a radius of 20 meters. We need to develop it further. Chenchu, thanks to the iguana, found the jackpot, and it was gold bars. He gave the command to the bespectacled man to direct the ship 3 kilometers to the east. He immediately obeyed. One of the guys asked if Boss Jean wasn't the only one who could breathe underwater. The employee answered the guy that they would not pry into other people's secrets and thereby close the conversation. The guys said that they had found something and began to pull a huge chest out of the water. Meanwhile, the iguana explored the depths of the ocean, continuing to search it. The guys accepted the information and said that they were returning. The stone in front of the boy looked like metal, some kind of durable material and similar to a special alloy. He decided that he should study it. The iguana dived as deep as possible and approached this unusual stone. But the huge fish opened its evil mouth. The iguana asked if he was trying to eat him and who he thought he was. The boy thought that even though this fish is larger and longer, he surpasses it in strength and protection. What a delicious fish it was. The iguana with a huge stone in its teeth swam forward, and now several hours have passed. The eroded reefs became incredibly hard. A deserted night beach is the perfect place to test your strength. The force works in both directions, but the density of his bones exceeds that of a human, and it absorbs most of the impact force. His body recovers easily and he feels almost no pain. After evolution, his physique exceeded 200. He has not yet tested his strength in action, but the weight here is definitely at least a ton. With his enhancement and fighting technique, he could easily punch through a person. The punching bag at home is not strong enough. He definitely cannot train in the gym, and if someone records it on video and posts it, then there will be problems later, mother. Don't worry. It will only attract unnecessary public attention. Only here he can train calmly and it's just great. He recovers so quickly and in a minute all the scratches are healed. While the main character was lying on the sand, an iguana with a huge stone in its mouth approached him. And here is the same ore. It doesn't look like much at first glance, but it definitely weighs at least 200 pounds. The stone is heavy but so fragile, even the lizard's claws try to scratch it. It would be a good material for weapons. But with his skills, it is hardly possible to create one now. For now, focus on the gold found today. The main character approached the guys and asked the one who met him where everyone was. The man replied that it was on the ship and they succeeded. Chen Chu was in the captain's cabin with gold bars. But one of the guys looked inside and asked how much money there was. He exclaimed that he had never seen so many gold bars. Chen Chu explained that they were not marked, which meant they were minted differently and they would not be able to sell them. The city center is in front of us. Many people were walking along the streets and in huge supermarkets. The main character entered the room and the girl at the reception greeted him. Chen Chu asked if they accept gold here. The girl replied that they did and asked if he had earrings or a necklace. The boy showed gold bars and explained that he wanted to sell them. The girl was very surprised and even became covered in beads of sweat. She said that there are quite a lot here. She asked him to follow her to introduce him to the owner. A guy approached them and said hello and asked them if he had any questions. The owner asked if he could find out his name and how much gold he wanted to sell. Chen Chu opened his backpack and replied that that was it. The owner was very surprised and said that it would take time for the gold to be checked for authenticity. The guy asked the main character to wait a little, and they began to check the ingots. The owner approached Chen Chu and said that the total weight of the ingots was 11 kilograms, 250 grams. They can offer him 400 wen per gram. Does he agree to this option? The main character, of course, agreed, and 4,500,000 yuan were transferred to his account. People his age are still studying at university, but he made millions in one fell swoop and it's just incredible. The boy decided that first he would buy a new car. The rough roads are just terrible to drive, and now he found himself in a huge car showroom containing luxury cars. Chen Chu began to look at many cars and choose one of them. Before he had time to look around, a girl approached the visitors and greeted them, but they didn't seem to notice her and began to leave without even answering her greeting. Chen Chu glanced at the girl and couldn't figure out if it was his ex. He then spent an eternity pleasing her in everything. She chased status and money and had fun with the rich. The girl told her boyfriend that the boy was a loser who used to be her lover. She asked what he forgot at the car dealership and called him a beggar. The car dealership employee asked how dare she, but Chen Chu stopped him. But the girl continued to say that they were forbidden to express the truth in person. But he couldn't even pay for his studies and he had nothing to do here. She asked her boyfriend not to waste time on him and go to the machines as soon as possible. The girl approached a luxurious convertible and said that she wanted this car. The guy agreed but explained that everything needed to be checked. He thought to himself that money was needed in order to make a great impression on women. But he is not yet ready to buy such expensive cars. Meanwhile, the main character was looking at a beautiful white car. He decided that this car had a high suspension, so this was what was needed. Chen Chu told the salon employee that he would pay by card. This car cost more than 2 million yuan. When the guys asked whether he would pay by card or cash, the guy replied that he would pay in cash. The girl watched from the side and was very surprised. Is he really ready to pay for such a car because it is very expensive? Her boyfriend came up and hugged her and said that he was bluffing and he didn't think he really had money. The girl replied that this was true and that for weeks he could not afford anything but noodles. Is a poor student really buying a premium car for himself? Is this serious? The guy asked his girlfriend to calm down because he was putting on a show in front of them. In any case, the payment will not go through. The salon employee said that they were his business. What happens if the payment goes through? The guy said that if yes, then he will call him daddy. If not, vice versa. So they agreed. The girl, looking closely at the boy, thought that he was acting as if he was really capable of buying this car. The car dealership employee was already approaching the gentleman and giving him the keys and card. She exclaimed that this car was now his. Chen Chu immediately thanked the employee. The girl couldn't understand where he got that kind of money. Did he really become so rich? The car dealership employee lifted the guy up by his arms and said that now he would have to call their boss daddy. But the main character asked his comrade to go quickly and not even waste time on these people. The guy replied that their boss is kind to them, so they should appreciate it. If it were him, he would clean his face with it. The girl sadly watched as her ex-boyfriend drove away in a luxury car. Suddenly, she began to run after the car and called the main character by name. One of the car dealership employees said that she thought she had found a rich guy, but in fact, she missed a real chance at a better life. This is the nature of people, and they regret something after they lose it. And here, we have the best restaurant in the city. The main character had already entered the room with his friend. They sat down at the table and the waiter asked what he would like to order. Chen Chu started ordering Boston lobster and king crab. He continued to leaf through the huge, expensive menu and decided that one of the dishes was a little expensive but worth it. The boy ate his fill because it was simply delicious. The girls around him asked if he wanted another piece. Chen Chu smiled contentedly and thought that after the heap of dishes the iguana had eaten, it was time to enjoy it himself. He held the phone in his hands and began to read what was written in the comments. The curator wrote that classes would begin in a week and asked not to forget about it. Chen Chu remembered that he had not been expelled yet. There isn't much time left. You need to earn evolution points faster. The swordfish is the fastest among the rest. It can reach speeds of up to 60 miles per hour or 90 kilometers per hour, but he's even faster. As soon as it is full, it will continue the treasure hunt. Evolution points were plus 10. Now he can determine what is around him at a distance of tens of kilometers. But after studying the seabed, he did not find a single sunken ship. So several days of fruitless searches passed. I wonder if there are any secret supernatural organizations under government control. In any case, you should be careful. And here in front of us, an elite office rises to the sky. The main character thought that after the company came here, Zhang never visited it. This is the busiest area in the city, and the location chosen for the office was chosen well. Inside the building, the girl at the reception told the guys that they had arrived. The guy asked Xiaoning to call everyone to the boss's office. The girl immediately obeyed him. The guy with glasses was telling the others that this was their new boss, Mr. Chen Chu. The students immediately greeted him. One of the girls thought that he was so young and already a boss. The girls thought he was handsome. The guys told the boss that this was Ning Naixing, their receptionist. The girl immediately greeted the boss. The second secretary brought her boss a cup of coffee and smiled sweetly at him. The guy with glasses explained to the main character that this was his personal assistant Su Len. Chen Chu didn't even look at her and said that she could leave the cup on the table. Surprisingly, the company has performed well. Its monthly maintenance costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. The boy told Zhan Shu that they would end the meeting and let everyone return to their duties. In the meantime, let him take care of the ship and find out more information. Chen Chu thought that the mind control effect was stable, but not as reliable as we would like. We need to develop this ability. The main character approached the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. He kept thinking that he was simply using the clones for hunting. But he does nothing and becomes stronger and stronger. This feeling is simply wonderful. Meanwhile, the iguana continued to hunt and eat more and more fish. Every day she fought with huge fish that were much larger in size than herself. He noticed a barracuda in front of him. but they are only 2 meters long, and this fish is 4 or 5. She is also very fast. If not for his external force field, he could have suffered. The number of ferocious mutated fish in the ocean is increasing. The fish is clearly not like the others. She clearly has a difference from the others. The main character noticed that his muscles and bones became much stronger and the gain was 10 times greater. But it looks like this is the only fish. She was very powerful and unusual. Meanwhile, at the main office, Ning Naik-sing asked Lan if she thought the boss had a girlfriend. Lane smiled back and asked if she was going to approach him already. Another employee said that she was at her best again. Before they could finish speaking, the boss came up and asked if they were finished. Lane immediately approached him with a folder in her hands and explained that there wasn't much left. Chen Chu thought about how, with his hearing, he could pick up any chatter around him. But to avoid awkwardness, he will pretend that he didn't hear anything. The main character told the girls that they worked very hard today. He asked if they wanted to go to dinner together. They were very surprised and thanked him for this. Chen Chu entered the restaurant. The waitress asked if he wanted to place an order right away. Ning Naik-sing thought that their boss's car was so expensive and obviously cost more than 2 million. They considered their boss to be very generous. The bill at the restaurant was 49,000 and he paid by card. Ning Naik-sing grabbed her head with her hands and asked who his parents were. Lane also noticed that the boss was throwing money away left and right. He clearly has a bright future ahead of him. Chen Chu told his employees that he would have more work to do in the evening. But after dinner, he would take them all home. The girls immediately thanked the boy for this. Chen Chu was already training with the sea breeze, calming him down. At night, on a deserted rocky shore, a boy beat his fists on a huge stone. During this time, he did not stop his training. His physique is better than that of an ordinary person, as is his strength. His blows easily break stones, but the stronger it is, the more difficult control becomes. You need to continue your training. The boy stumbled several times, so he tried not to give up. He glanced at the water and noticed that there was someone here at such a late hour. One of the guys said that they had already concluded so many deals, but he still had some kind of mistrust in him. Another guy told the boss that the rule was money first, product second. Chen Chu hid behind a rock and decided that they had some kind of deal. It seems they have weapons and you need to be careful. One of the guys told the boss that the product was great. The second one shook his hand and said that it was a pleasure to do business with him and he looked forward to further cooperation. Elder Key, things have been tough lately and you need to be careful. The employee agreed with the boss. He asked not to worry. They work through single channels. Even if something goes wrong, no one will know. Meanwhile, the main character was already above their heads. He approached the guys faster and faster and began to strike one after another. The boy had already scattered many of this gang, and they fell to the ground with a roar. The blonde man grabbed the gun and pointed it towards his opponent. Chen Chu was very dexterous and dodged the shot and hit him on the chin with all his might. The main character scattered all the opponents and they lay unarmed around the perimeter. Chen Chu thought that they had lost all humanity. By getting rid of them, he did the whole world a favor. Meanwhile, the iguana was already watching the boat, which was already far into the depths of the ocean. The iguana was already swimming to the bottom of this boat. She hit the boat with her face as hard as she could. The guys flew up into the air and asked what was under the water. They couldn't understand what was happening. Their entire gang flew out of the boat, which shattered into small fragments and began to fall into the water. They began to swim to the shore and shout that there was a monster there. The guys tried to swim to the shore. They called for help and swam as fast as they could to the shore, but the reptile was already catching up with them. One of the guys asked his boss to help him. They didn't stop screaming for help. One of them pulled out a gun and exclaimed that it looked like they couldn't escape. He decided to see if the monster would dodge the bullet and began shooting towards the reptile. The guy hit the iguana right in the head. There was a small flash in the form of golden lightning. The enemy was holding a pistol in his hand and was even more surprised, since the iguana had nothing to do with this bullet. She became even more angry and began to approach her opponent in order to neutralize him. The reptile took a huge suitcase in its teeth and began to quickly head in the right direction. Sometime later in Chen Chu's room, there was a suitcase with huge amounts of money on the table. The boy thought that one pack of banknotes is equal to 10,000. 3 million is 300 packs. When you hold cash in your hands, you begin to understand the full scale of what you have earned. The next morning at the cafe, the guys sat at the table and said that in front of them was a very amazing woman. The second guy replied that he would like to get to know her better. Lane approached her boss and, putting the documents on the table, asked him to sign them. The guys were very surprised that this was her boss and he was so young. They called him Boss Baby. They decided to go back to the office. The main character asked the secretary to notify him of the time of each meeting. The guys couldn't stop looking at him. They noticed some kind of mountain of muscles in front of them and considered this guy to be very healthy, which is quite frightening. In front of us is a conference room. The boy asked his employees to carefully think through every step of the strategy, and then they would be promoted. As long as the company's productivity grows, they will receive pleasant bonuses. Today is the last day before applying to the university and only Chen Chu remains. The main character took the phone in his hands and exclaimed that he thought it was time. He has urgent matters to attend to at the university. The boy said to his employees that there wasn't much work today and they could leave early. While he was gone, he asked Sue to take care of all corporate affairs. Ning Naixing was very surprised and asked if the boss was also studying. The employee replied that it was not surprising because it seemed to her that he was a rich heir. And here in front of us is the university campus. The main character began to get out of the car. The guys noticed him and asked if it was Chen Chu. And where did he get such an expensive car? She's worth more than 2 million. An announcement about the return to classes was posted on the university forum. On the last day of registration, a rich, tall, and handsome guy appeared out of nowhere in an expensive car. The girl was sitting at the computer and said that he looked very familiar, especially his black eyes. It's like there's a whole universe in them. The girl looked at this boy predatorily. Someone wrote in the comments that he is not a new student, but a second-year student at the Faculty of Economics. The guys wrote that his name is Chen Chu. The girl realized that this boy was studying with her. The main character, meanwhile, was walking along the road and thinking that his strength was growing so quickly, and he knew new techniques. While walking, he thought that he needed to continue training and working on control. With one blow, he could easily kill a person. You will have to work on strength and control yourself so as not to injure anyone. And after some time, Chen Chu approached the girl and said that he would like to order the remaining containers from her, about 100 tons or more. The girl invited him to come into the VIP room. She explained that she would contact their sales manager. The main character greeted the manager. The man asked what kind of steel he wanted to order from them. Chen Chu replied that he would like to order a steel column with a diameter of 2 meters and a height of 5, and several steel blocks, weighing 1, 5, 10, and 20 tons each. The manager replied that, based on his requirements, the total weight would be 200 tons. The estimated cost is about 700,000, but it ultimately depends on the finished product. Chen Chu said that this is very good and they can sign the contract. The next morning came. 2 guys were on a makeshift pier. The guy told his boss that this entire area was his warehouse. Chen Chu replied that this is very good and he can return to his duties. His clone scored 8 evolution points. A new transformation is just around the corner. The main character still has a long way to go. Once the steel column is installed in the warehouse, he will begin training. The maximum number of evolution points per day is 100. There's still a little bit left. Compared to the lizard, he achieved nothing. Liu Hao, known in the underworld as Big Luo, owns his own bar and commands almost a dozen. His right hand was cut off with a blunt instrument, and he was also hit in the chest with enormous force, crushing his internal organs, and he died on the spot. All 3 were killed within a minute by one person. This is just madness, and who is capable of such atrocity? The policeman told the captain that they had found another body. Meanwhile, in the office, Lane told her boss that they didn't have a new job and everyone was toiling from idleness. She asked to give them some assignment. Chen Chu laughed and said that the boss is like fishing on a lake and you have to wait for the fish to bite. Do they think they will go bankrupt at this rate? What about fulfilling duties and attracting clients? Ning Naixing came running and told the boss that they wanted to see him. It seems they want to discuss the terms of the deal. Lane pressed the folder with documents to her chest and thought that this was the same fish. A guy and a girl came into the office and asked where Zhang was. Chen Chu met them and explained that he and his men were now under his leadership. The boy laughed and said that this was even impressive, and his name was Wang Tian. Chen Chu asked him to sit down in order to discuss all the issues of interest. Lane approached the boss and said that she would prepare tea for him. The boy asked to hurry up. Wang Tian told the main character that he had one sunken ship that was worth at least a dozen liams. What does he think about it? Chen Chu replied that as soon as they came down to him, Boss Wang would decide to leave with all the goods he had received. But the guy replied that of course not, and he takes 70%, and Chen Chu 30%. This is practiced in foreign companies. The boy replied that it would be worth contacting them then. Wang Tian asked what he would offer him then. Chen Chu replied that it was only 50-50 and nothing else. Wang Tian thought that everything in their law is strict, and perhaps this is his only chance. The guy asked if he was sure that he would raise the ship at all. The main character replied that of course he was sure, and he had his own methods. He can go with them and see for himself. The guy agreed and said that it was nice to work together. They shook hands. Meanwhile, the policeman noticed huge claw marks. Well, who might have them? He was very confused and considered this an extraordinary anomaly. He stood up to reveal confidential information. A table of the internal messenger appeared in front of him. There was a reported massacre of 4 people at sea, and it may have been a beast. Lane asked her boss why he needed this huge column. The boy explained that it stabilizes water flows and deters underwater creatures. The girl thought that even she didn't know about it. The main character looked at his balance and noticed that money was flying away very quickly, and it was worth cutting down on expenses. The boy drove up to the apartment in his luxury car, dropping off his secretary. The girl thanked the boss for giving her a ride and asked if he would like to come to her for a drink of water. Chen Chu replied that he couldn't, because he still had things to do. As the car drove away, Len asked herself who was pulling her tongue to say such nonsense. It was not the best excuse to invite him to your place. She blushed a little, upset. When Chen Chu left, he thought that he accidentally broke his chopsticks at dinner. He will have to practice more in controlling his strength. The boy approached a huge, powerful stone and again began to hit it with his fist with all his might. He decided that he needed to hone his skills further. Now he feels everything that happens around him within a radius of 30 meters. He even feels the slightest breath of wind and the flap of the wing of a creature flying past him. 3 more days passed. The iguana's evolution points were already plus 210. Physical condition points plus 21. And here is a mutated fish with red eyes. Van's ship was already nearby. Chen Chu said that his people had already arrived and asked when they would start. The guy replied that he was very fast and said that he still needed to prepare something and he would finish it by the evening. So they agreed. The main character noticed that after long training he received another plus 15 to his aura. And with it, he increased his strength. The boy called on the radio and told his friend that he couldn't see his guys. The guy replied that they were already underwater and asked to tell him where he was now. The boy replied that 200 meters to the left of his ship, the ship was somewhere at a depth of 700, 800 meters. With his physique, the pressure underwater is not even felt. The boy was already swimming next to his iguana. They started checking the caves, but there was nothing there. The main character told his friend that there is nothing at this depth. Wang Tian was very surprised that he checked everything so quickly. He couldn't understand how the kid had checked such a large area in just 20 minutes. The guy with the glasses told his boss that the location had not changed. You should try to move a kilometer to the east. Meanwhile, the reptile was already swimming up to the gorge between 2 large stones. The main character swam next to his reptile to the appointed place. They began to look closely and saw something ahead. Chen Chu realized that they had found what they were looking for, and now the huge chest was already rising out of the water as high as possible. The guys asked to hold tight. The employee explained to the boss that 8 of the pieces were broken and the other 3 were intact. Estimated cost is about 30 million. Selling privately, they would have gained another 20 plus. Wang Tian asked if he had heard this. He decided to just take his part of the money and that's it. Several days passed. The guy was very pleased and shouted that it was 23 million. Everyone gets more than 11. He asked the main character to count if he wanted. Chen Chu replied that he shouldn't, because he trusts him. He promised to contact him later if he got more information. The main character decided that the money problem had been solved, but he was still weak. You need to train until bullets and grenades stop affecting him. Suddenly, a blonde guy entered the room. He greeted the main character and asked if he was Mr. Chen Chu. The guy introduced himself as Li Tian, Deputy General Manager of Tianhong Company, also a friend of Wang. Chen Chu greeted him back. Li Tian wanted to offer him cooperation and asked if he would mind. The boy replied that he didn't mind, but it would be better to discuss all the details tomorrow. Lan brought her boss's business card to Mr. Li. Li Tian took the business card and said that it was very good. He said goodbye to the main character and will see you soon. Ning Naik Singh asked what kind of company this was. The employee said that she did not expect this guy to be so young. She knows that their chairman receives tens of billions and he is almost the richest man in the city. He has the same surname as Chairman Tianhong. It is possible that they are related. Ning Naik Singh exclaimed, looking after the boy, that this was simply amazing. Just imagine what it would be like to meet such a person. Meanwhile, the main character was thinking that even the son of the richest man is interested in sunken ships. What a coincidence. He had just caught a large, expensive fish in the sea. Not just one fish, but two. In front of us is a huge and compact warehouse. The fish costs over $10 million, and its meat doesn't taste all that special. And why so much money? The main character said that they need to sell it to someone. While the boy was training, the secretary told the boss that young Master Lee had been waiting for him for a long time. Chen Chu replied that he would be there soon. Meanwhile, at the company office, Mr. Lee was already sitting in a chair and telling Mr. Chen that he had the exact location of the shipwreck. The main character asked why he was interested in sunken ships. Does he really have that much money? But the guy replied that there is no such thing as too much money. Chen Chu did not have time to listen to the guy before he offered him to divide the booty 50-50. Mr. Lee immediately agreed. The boy thought that it was obvious that he was not after the treasures on board. He became very interested. Chen Chu asked casually if he knew anyone who ran a high-end seafood restaurant. He explained that he needed to sell the 4-meter bluefin tuna somewhere. Mr. Lee was very surprised that he even had this. He chuckled and took out his phone and replied that he had a couple of contacts. The guy promised to invite him to dinner and introduce them to each other. Let's go back to the warehouse. The boy asked manager Lin not to rush so much because the fish would not run away from them. The guy approached this huge fish and told the boss that it was of excellent quality and should be taken. The man with glasses smiled and exclaimed that they had not lied to him and asked, "How about 7 million?" Chen Chu smiled and immediately agreed. Lane watched him and thought that he sold just one fish for such a huge amount, and it was incredible. In front of us is the Marriott shopping center. It was luxurious and spread over a huge square in the city. The main character said that they had a great catch today and they could spend some money. Lane thought that Marriott was a place where the world's leading brands were sold. How easily he spends his money. The saleswoman immediately noticed a big spender in her store who appeared on the horizon. The secretary couldn't stop looking at her boss. After all, his watch alone cost 2 million. He bought so many luxury goods and clearly spent more than 1 million. Chen Chu said that he thought he wanted to buy a villa. Comfort is important to him and the place should be large and spacious. We need to find something around 30 million yuan. The secretary replied to the boss that she understood him perfectly. Meanwhile, under the water, a huge, beautiful iguana was already cutting through the ocean. What a pity that Chen Chu is not yet strong enough to tear the submarines apart. He was as if one with his reptile and adored this pet. The reptile swam up to a huge stone, and the boy decided that there seemed to be something strange below. It's better to leave this place and don't take risks. When the iguana began to swim away from an unknown place, a huge crab with long, sharp claws began to approach him. But the main character thought that he had messed with the wrong person and began to repel the enemy's attack. The iguana swung its tail, hitting the claw of this evil huge crab. The reptile noticed that this opponent was much stronger than the other fish that came across his path. The fight continued, and the reptile fought off the attacks of the huge crab, trying to attack as well. The reptile noticed a lot of power in this crab, and the boy became very interested. The fight lasted for a long time and they attacked each other, but the iguana was stronger. She decided that she couldn't eat it in one go and would have to tear it apart piece by piece, slowly savoring each piece. Chen Chu opened his computer and began looking through the report from the report on unusual marine phenomena over the past few years. There have been giant fish until now, and now there are also huge crabs. The boy decided that something was clearly wrong here. An M-class nuclear submarine went missing at a depth of 600 meters in the Pacific Ocean. The last message was that it was attacked by an unknown giant sea creature. The nuclear boat collided with an iceberg and all crew members were killed. And all this happened in just a couple of years. The main character decided that each case has a relationship. The iguana's evolution points have increased and its body's combat characteristics have also increased. Chen Chu was happy about their success because he had become much bigger. His physical condition increased again. The bones and muscles feel completely different. Now even hitting the iron with your fist does not cause pain. Bullets can only scratch his skin but not touch him, and with his defense speed, no one can beat him. In front of us is a wide Xinhua bookshop. Chen Chu was already near her and leafing through books. He thought that the world is not as simple as he thought. Reading and learning is always useful. The girl sat at the table and said that this guy was very handsome. The second girl replied that if she thinks so, she should approach him and ask for his contact information. The girl told her friend that she was afraid to do this. Chen Chu thought that the only way to advance was through training. He found himself back in the training room. He hit the huge punching bag with all his might. Baji Yuan and Xin Quan seem simple, but practicing them is not an easy task. Suddenly, the main character's phone rang and they texted him that they had arrived. The guy said that it was very good and asked me to send them their location. His men will be underwater in half a day. A little time passed. The boys told their boss that they had found gold and some broken china. Has he seen the special box? If he can find her, then everything else on the destroyed ship is his. Chen Chu agreed and started searching. The boy realized that the gold itself would cost 20 million. What is in this box? He looked more closely and saw only a pile of black dirt. It became unclear to him what he wanted to do with her. The main character opened this box, and there was indeed a pile of black dirt in front of him. When the guy opened the box, he grabbed his head with his hands. He started shouting that this couldn't be happening, and where did his elixir go? This means that those people who died earlier, they are drained of blood, and their muscles are dried out like jerky. But only about 10 hours had passed since his death. The policeman decided to wait for his superiors to go down and explore the area. All the victims were bandits, without families but physically strong. The man told Xiaozheng that he should then write a report and shut down all the entertainment establishments in the city. Later at night, a creepy monster girl appeared above the guy and was completely covered in blood. The policeman clutched the walkie-talkie in his hands and exclaimed that this couldn't be happening. Absolutely everything is closed, as 4 more managed to die. Chen Chu was training in the gym again. After a few days of training, he made great progress in martial arts. The system reported that he had learned a new martial arts technique and asked him to name it. Chen Chu called it Explosive Fist. It combines the 8 extremes position and the half step from the pig technique. 1 step and explosive fists like cannonballs. Meanwhile, the guys were sailing in the boat, and the guy was talking about how he had finally caught a fish after chasing a school for such a long time. But you need to be careful, and this time the investment was huge. The fishing net alone cost millions and no misfire could be allowed. The man told his boss that there was a hole in the center of the net and the fish was escaping. The boss called him names and asked him to pick up the net quickly. But the man replied that the detector showed nothing and the network was not moving. Chen Chu thought that in one bite there are dozens, and this delivery world is too pleasant. It is so similar to water that their sonars cannot detect it at all. The reptile has eaten, and it's time to go home. Meanwhile, the man grabbed his head with his hands and asked why all his nets were torn and the fish left. What kind of monster or divine creature could do this? At the pier, Boss Chen was told by phone that they were moving back to the city. To prove his gratitude, he will take him to a beautiful place tonight. The main character replied that since young Master Li invited him, he would definitely go. And now the elegant Menglu pavilion was already luring with its beauty. The boy was met by a girl who greeted him and began to invite him to the elegant pavilion. The gentleman asked the girl if the Yunxiao Hall had been booked. It is always reserved for young Master Li. The guys began to go into the huge, beautiful Yunxiao Hall, which attracted with its comfort. The main character thought that it doesn't matter that the king neglects his duties. There is a reason for this. Places like this perfectly immerse you in the atmosphere. After all, the car drove into the thick of the forest along a smooth, grassy path. The boy felt that someone was on his tail. This aura makes him feel uncomfortable. The same feeling as the night he was chased by a giant lizard. The main character began to take a closer look and wondered if it was a monster or a ghost. He became interested because he had not stretched his legs for a long time. A convertible car was driving opposite him, and the guy asked if he wanted to compete with it. Chen Chu turned his head in their direction and, as if he saw something, began to drive even faster. He was very brave and strong, and his car was like a beast. He immediately broke away from the guys. This turn was just crazy. Is he trying to kill himself? The guys could not understand whether he was a person at all. The main character thought that at this speed even faster cars could not catch up. But that thing is still around, and it looks like he's no weakling. Chen Chu drove his car to the seashore and got out. The boy asked the one who was hiding not far from him to come out and said that he was not bad. It was a girl, and she said that my brother talks funny. The girl explained that she was just swimming in the sea and someone had taken her clothes. She asked if he could give her something to throw on. Chen Chu had already flown towards her to strike. He tried to attack immediately, but the monster girl jumped to the side, moving away from him. He told the monster that if she needed clothes, then of course he would find something for her right now. The monster girl noticed that he had a very powerful and rich life force, and she really wanted to eat him. Chen Chu asked what she even was. The monster replied that she was a human, but a more advanced version, and her name was Yin Xiao. It will taste like hundreds of healthy, energetic people. The monster began to chase the boy. She said that this would be enough for her to complete the first stage of evolution. She asked if he wanted to eat it and said that she wanted to see if he could deserve it. But before she could finish speaking, the boy threw her to the ground. She said that it was very fast and that it was basically impossible. The main character hit with all his might the tree that was next to him. The monster girl began to sink into the ground as if in a sandstorm or some kind of swamp. Chen Chu realized that it could merge with tree roots and rocks. But every time he attacks his weak points, the aura of this monster weakens. He asked if it merges with the roots. It's a nice survival skill, but it's such a shame that she encountered it. The boy asked him to answer a few questions and he would give the monster a quick death. The monster asked if he looked like someone who was afraid of death and laughed, and said that there was very beautiful moonlight around. What a pity he won't see him again. But he has already avenged himself. If only he had one more month, he could complete his shadow transformation. Then even the god of war would not have scared him. But instead, he ran into him in an ordinary old city, and this is very sad. The system reported that the main character killed the seducer and received 10 attribute points. Chen Chu couldn't understand what attribute points the system was talking about. He already has extraordinary powers and soon the iguana will have them too. Suddenly, the boy's gaze changed and he looked in front of him, smiling. He saw a huge real Godzilla trying to burn him with fire. Meanwhile, a car was driving up to the warehouse. The boy checked the information. He thought about the seducer and the awakener. He tried to compare everything that happened to him. There was no up-to-date information available at his request. It looks like the authorities blocked these details, but oh well, he's still too weak right now. He will explore this world again when he becomes a little stronger. Maybe after his strength reaches 10,000 points. The system asked the owner to select the element that he wants to strengthen. Only basic elements can be enhanced. The boy decided to strengthen the lightning. It was a finger version of lightning, but thanks for that. Even lightning mastery has experience points. It looks like they can be increased through training, and that's not bad. The main character continued to train and the iguana flashed with lightning, killing its victims. 980 evolution points were obtained. Another mutated sea beast is no less terrifying than that giant crab. Even the giant iguana now has lightning mastery and is stronger than him. In front of us is a huge, beautiful airport in the city of N. A guy approached two guys. He asked if they were two agents from the Bureau of Special Assignments. He introduced himself as Guande, sent to meet them. The man shook his hand and introduced himself as Huang Junfeng. He thanked him in advance for your cooperation. The guy with glasses, Nang Gongjian, introduced himself as the chief investigator of Case 907 and asked to show them the body. When he approached the dead man, the expert said that this man died last night and only one corpse was found. 4 days earlier, 4 people mystically died in one night. The man approached the corpse and extended his hand to it. She glowed with a bright green light. The guy was simply shocked and glanced at the expert. He was also very surprised. The boy said that the aura had disappeared and it was dead. The guy standing next to him couldn't understand what he meant by the word "it." Meanwhile, the main character continued to train in the warehouse. His power has increased too quickly and he cannot control it. He does not dare to visit Ning Naixing because he is afraid that he will break her sofa just by sitting on it. The girl asked the boss if he would mind coming up to her for tea. But Chen Chu apologized and said that he still had plans. The boy thought that he would not be able to get close to her. What if he accidentally breaks her bones? The next day came. A guy with a folder in his hands showed Mr. Chen Villa, number 88. The main building has an area of 560 square meters with a front yard. The guy began to explain, telling about the territory. He said that the buyer paid for everything in full, including more than $1 million worth of furniture. The total cost is $34 million. The main character said that he would buy it for $25 million. When he picked up the phone, the employee told him that there was a monster in front of him and asked for help. The captain was told that there had been no suspicious activity since last night. The seducer is truly dead. But this is strange since it was in a polyester state. Such a creature cannot be controlled by a mere mortal. The guy asked the captain if they should stay and investigate. You can watch the bustle in this city, but the captain asked to use the time for training. Otherwise, when the apocalypse comes, he will become just cannon fodder. The man explained that the professor predicted that the next fluctuations in space would be 10 times stronger than the previous 20 years ago. The most important thing now is to improve their capabilities in anticipation of that day. This is the only way they can pay the country for taking care of them. Meanwhile, the boy, merging with the iguana, finally found something worthwhile. But he kicked up too much sand and broke a lot of porcelain, and it was his fault. He found one Song Dynasty gold item worth at least several million, perhaps even tens of millions, and that's simply incredible. It's a pity that he accidentally broke so many things. It could cost hundreds of millions. Meanwhile, the waitress was carrying a tray and asked the visitor why he was grabbing it. The man replied that she had dreamed something and asked her not to blame him. Well, since she told him about it, maybe he really has something to grab onto. One of the men sitting at the table asked how he could be so shameless, and he saw it with his own eyes. Then the guy asked what's wrong, and if he cares, then let him try to hit him. The main character said that he was very interested because he had never seen such an arrogant guy like this guy. The impudent man, putting his hands on his hips, replied that he saw him today, and if the boy is unhappy, let him attack. The guy raised his hands up and asked his opponent to attack immediately. Chen Chu realized that this was another youngster who had blood in his head and only knew how to talk. The boy asked the girl if there were surveillance cameras in their establishment. The girl went to the socket and pulled out the wire from it. She decided it would be better this way. The girl exclaimed with tears in her eyes that their cameras suddenly broke. The guy who was so brave grimaced in a frightened smile and, moving his eyebrows to his nose, threw a frightened look at the main character. Before he had time to strike, a powerful palm fell on the cheek of this scoundrel. Chen Chu immediately knocked this crazy guy to the floor with his palm. Today, someone really wanted to be beaten. The main character felt very funny and smiled. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, the boy was lying on his sofa with his hand out in front of him. Lightning control was already plus 10. The spirit also increased. The boy thought that human life does not reach a century, and this is just a moment in the life of a star. One day he will destroy the boundaries between life and death. And then the next day came. Chen Chu asked his secretary Lan to take the time to study accounting. She will manage the company's finances when the time comes, and he will pay her double the rate. The girl was very surprised and agreed with her boss. When the guy approached his car, she asked where he was going now. Chen Chu replied that he was going to sell something. And here in front of him stood a man with glasses. He explained that his last name is Gao, and he is the owner of this antique store. The boy asked Mr. Gao if he could help determine how much this plate cost. He asked him to discuss this with him upstairs. The gentleman led the guys to the second floor. The boy felt that it gave off the salty smell of the sea, and it looked like she had just been caught. Mr. Gao began to explain to the young man that this was not a fake at all, but it was part of a set, and he only has one part of it, which significantly reduces the cost. Chen Chu replied that in fact it was a set, and when he found this porcelain bottle, there were many more like it lying around. Unfortunately, this is the only one that survived. The man said that it was really a pity, and if there was only one item, he could only offer 4.5 million. The boy replied that he would think about it, and his secretary was waiting for him on the street. She told her boss that after how many establishments, Mr. Gao seems to be the most honest. Chen Chu replied to the girl that he made the highest offer. Maybe I should just sell it to him, but there was something wrong in his gaze and he was definitely hiding something. Meanwhile, in the living room of a luxury villa, the man asked his friend if he said that he had found some kind of clue on that sunken ship. Mr. Gao replied that he could look at this porcelain, and he had the authentication stamp they were after. The young man sold him porcelain, and he should know more details. The man asked to give information to Fox, and within half an hour, he wants to know everything about this guy. A few more minutes passed. Mr. Gao told his boss that he was an ordinary college student who unexpectedly spent 3 million to buy a luxury car and even went abroad with Li Tianrui. The guy asked his boss whether he should continue working with his supporters. The boss's name was Du Hong. He asked about cooperation and suddenly laughed. Mr. Gao asked the protagonist to fill out this form and said that they need the parts from him for future transactions and auctions. The main character, lying in bed, thought that today's transaction went unexpectedly smoothly. He can't shake the feeling that Mr. Gao is hiding something. He will hope that nothing strange will happen. Last night passed without incident. Maybe he thought about it too much? The kid decided to just go straight to college and deal with things. After absorbing the sea python, his strength, muscle density, and everything else far exceeded that of an ordinary person. He wondered if he could now withstand the shots. The main character himself ran into trouble. A guy approached him from behind and asked him not to make any sounds and to stomp after him. He pointed the weapon at the boy. Chen Chu asked where exactly he was taking him. He doesn't remember ever bothering them. The man behind the wheel replied that they were taking him to a meeting with someone and asked him not to try to do anything. The guy did not let go of the gun and asked him to move faster. They told the boss they had brought him. The boss asked to see who this guy was. He told his boys that they kept him waiting all night. Chen Chu asked why they were the only ones here. This guy was so scared, but now he is suddenly calm and something is wrong here. The boss decided that his calmness was very annoying. He asked his people why they were just standing there and asked them to grab their weapons. He was indeed right, and the guys immediately pulled out their pistols and began pointing them towards the enemy. But the main character, outrunning the bullets, performed crazy moves and scattered everyone around. All the guys who held pistols could do nothing against him. The two pointed guns at him and asked him to put the gun down. Did he really not hear them? And they repeated once again that the boss ordered him to throw the gun. He has one trunk, and he has two. And by the way, there is only one bullet in his gun. The boss explained to the kid that they surrounded him. The boy asked the guys if they really didn't understand anything. They are the ones surrounded by him? The main character smiled sarcastically and asked them to tell who was behind them. If they are honest, then everything will happen quickly for them.